this going. Today, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how we are making the transition to mobile. So traditionally, we've been on Facebook. We've established a fairly large user base and have some successful games on Facebook. And I want to really talk to you about what we're doing to adapt our development methodology and process, strategy, etc. as we're moving from browser to mobile and then potentially beyond. So first, I want to talk to you about what we see as the current platform opportunities. So first there's Facebook and browser, which we consider Kixeye.com, which is our own site. We see mobile as a huge platform opportunity. And then there is the potential, and this is a big question mark for us still, but I can see a future when consoles will be an excellent platform for free-to-play games. So that's something that we're looking at. But right now, we're really still focused on maximizing both the Facebook platform and mobile. So each of these platforms has a different strength and weakness. And what I'm really going to talk to you about today is how we feel that to be successful on any platform, you need to leverage what differentiates that platform to deliver the highest quality game experience for the player. So we've seen great success on Facebook and browser, as I stated before. The move from Facebook to mobile necessitates that we adapt how we design and develop our games into, like I stated, to get the most out of it. So to give you a little bit of context on what we're doing, I think it's important to go through how we approach making Facebook and browser games. So as we all know, we can take a little trip back in time here. 2009 through 2011, 12-ish, we saw hyper growth in Facebook. I'm not going to go into the numbers. Everybody knows that was a hockey stick up and to the right. So for us, as we entered the Facebook browser market, as I mentioned previously, we felt we needed to deliver an experience that leveraged the platform's strengths. So we needed to build games that took advantage of what differentiated Facebook browser from other platforms. So what did Facebook bring to the table that no other platform at that time had? It was accessibility, unprecedented accessibility, and social. So those are the two areas that we really focused on. So let's talk a little bit about accessibility and what that meant on Facebook at the time. So conventional thinking at that time was that to be successful, you needed to be not only accessible from a gameplay standpoint, which I'll talk about in a second, but also thematically. So you needed to be as broad as possible. So remember this, because I'm going to use this as an analogy when we talk about mobile. So this is why you see a lot of games with very broad themes, such as farming or dining. These broad themes also carried over to game's art direction. So you saw a lot of, very cheery color palettes. The characters needed to have big heads and big eyes. If you didn't have those types of characters, everybody thought you were destined for failure. From a gameplay standpoint, conventional thinking at the time was that games needed to have short play sessions. I'm on the wrong slide here. That ultimately the core mechanics were built to leverage the player's social network, but that the audiences on Facebook at the time, they weren't hardcore gamers. They didn't want deep, complicated game loops. They wanted to get in, get out. The gameplay needed to be interruptible. And if you actually look at how the games were architected, they were architected around leveraging those, the viral channels, etc. So you got a lot of mechanics that were built around getting gifts. So as people stated, as sort of the reputation for Facebook's game develop as they mature, it was all about begging to your friends. So We looked at this, and we looked at the fact that accessibility was sort of the, obviously one of the platform strengths, and then also that social was one of the platform strengths. But we were looking at what everybody else was doing, which was what I just talked about, going very broad, making very shallow, short play sessions, and we saw an opportunity. So first, we are firm believers in accessibility. But we look at it less about dumbing down the theme and reducing complexity, and more about eliminating the friction to get into the game. So for us, the target demographic is much more of a core gamer. And being a PC gamer, if any of you are PC gamers, is tough. If you want to play a game, you have to go through arduous install processes. You have to wait for updates. You have to install new video drivers. I got a new machine, I think about a week ago, and I was installing League of Legends, and it took me, and I timed it, 3 hours to get up and running. So I had to download the client, I had to do a bunch of updates, then my drivers didn't work, so I had to call the IT guy in. I was doing this at work, and got him to figure it out. As a matter of fact, it's still crashing a bunch, so I gotta sort that out. So bottom line is, we felt there was an opportunity on Facebook and mobile, or in Facebook and browser, to provide a really accessible experience. So we're also firm believers in social. Now, as I stated before, social on Facebook was a completely new concept. You could really leverage a player's social network and get network effects, etc. And the majority of the mechanics for the games that were growing and had hyper growth really did leverage the viral channels, but the mechanics, as I stated before, were all about figuring out how to send as many feeds and requests. So we took a different approach, and again, this is the common theme, is us sort of looking at what the platform opportunities are and looking at it differently and taking a different approach. So we wanted to create a social experience that was much more akin to what you saw in an MMO. So that's really where we come up with the concept of developing RTS MMOs. So what we created was a persistent world with the ability to play asynchronously or synchronously with your friends and other players. The ability to play PvP and PvE, chat with your friends. So these are much more standard and truly social gaming mechanics. So by doing this on Facebook, we sort of zigged when other people zagged, and we created a market for ourselves and really proved that you could deliver a much more core gaming experience on the Facebook browser platform. And we continue to see tremendous success on this platform. Matter of fact, Battle Pirates and War Commander, which are our two largest games, continue to increase revenue quarter over quarter, and DAU for games that are 2+ years old is flat, and actually we started growing it again last month. So we're now moving fast into mobile, and I'm not going to bore you with the stats on how big the market is. I'm assuming you guys know all about that. So obviously there's a huge opportunity on the mobile, but I want to talk to you a little bit about how we view mobile, how we think it's changing how people play. So when I talk about mobile, I'm mostly talking about tablet as a gaming platform. The phone is awesome, but tablet is really almost competitive with a console. We'll talk about that in a second. But really, it is the ultimate device for accessibility. So this picture that you see up here is pretty typical in many households. Matter of fact, this is basically what I was doing last night, where various other people in my family were doing either texting their friends on Facebook, watching TV. I was playing, laying on the sofa, playing XCOM Unleashed, which is a great game, by the way. I would recommend it. So everybody's connected 24 hours a day, as we know. So what does this mean for Kixeye and how we are approaching mobile game development and design? Our players play Facebook and browser games like they play console games. They sit down for meaningfully long play sessions. Our average session length for War Commander, Battle Pirates, and our newest game, Vega Complex, Vega conflict, is over 30 minutes per play session. And then players play up to 9 times a day. So we're getting, I mean, these guys are playing, or these users are playing our games a ton. So we actually believe that this sort of play, this play session length, this will translate to mobile. Players will use their tablets as either an alternative to their main gaming device or their main gaming device. So, as previously discussed, to be successful, you need to leverage the platform's strengths. Mobile and the tablet in particular are incredible gaming platforms. They have an awesome high-def screen, great processing power, and graphic capabilities that are getting competitive with consoles and PCs. Now, the most interesting thing in my mind as a developer is the input. The touch screen is incredibly intuitive. You can give it to a 2-year-old and they'll figure it out in 2 seconds. And it's an incredibly flexible input. So really looking at focusing on how to leverage our games, how to take advantage of what mobile tablet has to offer. So the way that we've changed our development methodology, just like we looked at Facebook, saw what the platform advantages for Facebook were, we're doing the same thing on mobile. So there's 4 key areas that we're focused on, and they are session length, controls, UI, and gameplay. So I'm going to go into specifics on each of these and how we're approaching it. So let's first start with session length. One of the first things we discussed, and this was a very heated discussion, was when we moved to mobile, was how long were we going to make this session length. We kept hearing from people that had experience building mobile games that you had to shorten the play session. That mobile players don't want to play anything longer than a few minutes. So we think this is BS. As I stated before, our players play games like on Facebook and browser, our games, like they play them on console, and we believe that this is going to translate into the mobile state. So our hypothesis is that players will sit down and play games on their tablet for hours at a time, just like they consume movies, TV on their tablet. I mean, I watch Breaking Bad on my tablet, I watch movies on my tablet. Why wouldn't I sit down for a meaningfully long game session as long as the gameplay will support it? So players are also becoming increasingly sophisticated in their appetites and expectations and are demanding a more immersive, polished, high-quality experience. So again, this is very similar to what we saw on Facebook, where we had a lot of broad, casual games, but the reality is there is demand for a more core game experience. So we are not making snackable games. We are focused on making sure that session length is consistent with our other games. Again, we feel that there is demand. But we are doing something from a design perspective to make it easier to play on the mobile form factor. So you're much more likely to drop out, get a note of something like that, switch out an app. It's just very easy to do on mobile. So we have to make our games interruptible. So we're not changing session length, but we are making it interruptible. And the way that we're doing this is we're actually looking at all the pain points for the player. So we create what we call an interrupt matrix. Any place the player could drop out, we go through and we look at what the condition is and what the penalty potentially for the player is, and we try to minimize the penalty on the player. So let me give you a specific example. So let's say you're in a PvP attack with another player, and you are doing this synchronously, and your connection drops out. So the way that we've architected this so that the player isn't penalized is we actually have AI take over at that moment. So the minute that there's a dropout, AI will take over. If there's some sort of issue with connection to the server, which we actually can't run the AI, we'll just figure out who was winning in the trend of that battle, and and then award the player the win-loss condition based off of that. So again, very painless to the player. You could theoretically drop out of the battle and not be penalized, which is really what we're looking for. So again, we're methodically going through and figuring out how to make our game sessions interruptible. But again, not shortening the session length. Go to the next slide. So the other thing that one of the other things that we're really focused on are controls. As I mentioned before, input device is revolutionary in my mind. It's one of the biggest innovations and input, for my generation. One of the challenges we have is how do you create a fun RTS experience, leveraging the touch control, not just porting mouse keyboard, but actually adding value to the player through this device. Because as I said before, we got to be successful on these platforms, we really have to take advantage of what these platforms do well. So games like Clash of Clans, which I'm sure you guys have heard of, have done this by simplifying unit control. So each unit has its own behavior. Basically they implemented what we did in Backyard Monsters, and this is what we're doing for Backyard Monsters Unleashed, which is our first mobile game. But basically, you drop it's tap and pray, as we call it. The strategy is to figure out, before you go into an attack, which units you need, but then it's hands-free after that point in time, and you're just hoping that the AI will do what you want it to do, and that you use the right units for said attack. So that's really sort of a shallower RTS experience. So as we've been developing, we've really tried to figure out how to optimize and maximize for the input. And one of our goals was really to figure out how to get squad control, because that's incredibly important to more sophisticated RTSs. We are not trying to, as I stated before, port mouse and keyboard functionality. But we want to do this as an intuitive way as possible. So the way that we do this is through basically a two-step process, which involves just a crap load of iteration. So as we develop our core competency in mobile and develop experience with the touch device, this becomes easier, and your first initial concept is usually better. But from a pure development standpoint, just get something into the game, test it, and see if it's fun. Iterate, iterate, iterate. So, and we do that not only in an individual product, where we have this sort of iteration loop, but we do this from product to product. So as I stated before, Backyard Monsters Unleashed, we used the approach that was developed for Backyard Monsters on browser, which was tap, drop your units, AI controlled. As we were experimenting with this for War Commander, which is our next mobile product, we came up with this touch, hold, and drag weight-proning approach, which you can see a little bit on there. But it gives players the ability to control individual platoons and squads in an incredibly intuitive way, which is actually one, more intuitive and more precise than mouse keyboard. So this is an area, again, that we're leveraging the platform strengths to improve the overall quality of the game. So third is user interface. So good UI design tells the player what they need to know fast and intuitively, and then gets the F out of the way. This becomes particularly challenging with RTSs, where we need to communicate a lot of information to the player so that they can make the right strategic choices to succeed in any given game. So when you develop a game for browser, you have the luxury of adding as many buttons, pop-ups, menus as you want. Matter of fact, it's actually kind of a crutch in a lot of cases. So on mobile, you have to be absolutely ruthless and simply display the most relevant and important information to the player. This has been perhaps one of the most challenging aspects as we've transitioned to mobile and taken a lot of iteration and a lot of discipline. So the process that we go through to ensure that our is at the quality bar that we want is, one, we ruthlessly identify the piece of information we're trying to communicate. And the reason I say we have to be incredibly ruthless and disciplined about this is that, again, on Facebook and browser, you can afford to do as many pop-ups as you want. And honestly, that's sloppy. So, for mobile, it's getting down to the core essence of the game experience and what you need to communicate. So we then display that in a quick, clean way to the player, and as I stated before, get it out of the way. And then, again, iterate, iterate, iterate. So this is going to be a consistent theme through those 4 different areas that we're attacking for mobile. It's all about iteration as we develop and build our core competency in building mobile. So let's talk a little bit about gameplay. So similar to what I discussed about session length, and I talked about this a bit when I was doing a little retrospective on Facebook and how we entered the market. Conventional thinking is that you have to broaden the market on mobile. Is that you have to make games that are hyper accessible from a thematic standpoint. And again, we think this is BS. So we have adapted our art style to leverage the advantages and disadvantages of the platform. So this, changing the art style, the way we're doing it, isn't necessarily designed to broaden. So the art look that we're doing is still very consistent with the Kixeye brand, War Commander, Backyard Monsters brand, whatever game we're working on. It's still targeted to a more core audience. But we do have to do some things to make sure that our games fit within the memory footprint of the device. And so for that, from an art direction standpoint, we've been focused on adding a little bit more style, but again, making sure that thematically it fits in with our products' brands. From a thematic standpoint, we are definitely not changing the theme of our games. We make core games, we make war games, it's all about fighting, we monetize revenge, and we're not changing that at all. We think that there's a huge opportunity on mobile for this space, for this type of game. And this goes for the same for our mechanics. So, I talked a little bit before about shortening session length. There's a lot of talk about how you have to simplify the mechanics on a game. Again, I think this is BS. I think there is a tremendous amount or a tremendous demand for more complex, deep gameplay. So, but for us, we look at how we're delivering that complexity and that depth. And since RTSs are inherently complex, we spend a lot of time looking at how to introduce game mechanics and the complexity. So on Facebook and browser, we can afford to introduce complexity earlier in the player's life cycle. There are tools at the disposal that you have. We can do video tutorials, we can do pop-ups, things like that. On mobile, we don't have that ability. So we actually have to be smarter about how we develop and design our game, especially the early game. So from a development standpoint, we follow this process. First, we are introducing, through context-sensitive tutorials, gameplay. So in small, bite-sized chunks. So if we're going to introduce a new mechanic, a new hull, a new unit, a new weapon type, we will do it one at a time. We will train the player on using it. We will then balance the game so that they master. So it's introduce, train, master, rinse and repeat, so that the players are getting step through. We're bringing players through the game, and ultimately we are taking what we call minnows, which are light touch, early players, not fully engaged, and getting them more engaged and creating what we call sharks out of those players. Oops. So, I think my time is up. To wrap up, we think there's a huge opportunity for core games on mobile. So as I've talked about, transitioning from Facebook to browser, I really recommend that you challenge preconceived notions of what you need to do to be successful on said platform. So look at it orthogonally. On Facebook browser, when we entered that market, the assumption to be successful was that you had to be broad, you had to be social as Facebook defined it. We zigged when others zagged and had tremendous success on that space. Mobile is the same way. Obviously, mobile is getting a little bit more saturated, but there's a huge opportunity to feed core gamers on this platform. It has the power, it has the accessibility to be an incredible gaming platform, and really it's an underserved market, and that's what we're going to do. We are in the process of delivering 3 mobile games within the next quarter or 2 that are specifically targeted at this demo, and we think there's a huge opportunity on it. So that is it. Thank you very much.